One would need to have the most juvenile, classless sensibilities possible to find any of this trash even remotely entertaining. In other words, I loved it.
Yo, what's up? Welcome to Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I am Austin Hayden Smith.
And I'm Troy Polidori.
And this week we have a guest. Macon Holt will be joining us, and we're going to be talking pretty much around his book that just recently came out with Bloomsbury. It's called Pop Music and Hip Ennui, a sonic fiction of capitalist realism. Give people a 30-second pitch. What piqued your interest about this book, and why was this conversation so great?
Yeah, I mean, we've already recorded it, so we have more than a sneak peek into it. But if you're interested in the sort of confluence between pop music and cultural theory, and especially, if you've listened to the podcast for a long time, Mark Fisher's capitalist realism was a big influence on the both of us. Then this is going to be right up your alley. And I don't know how it couldn't be, because those are all great things, all mashed together into one.
That is right. So stick around for that. It was a great conversation. Macon's a really good scholar and brought in, I think, a lot of really interesting stuff. So, yeah, you'll get a lot out of it.
We also want to say, if you want to support us in tangible ways, you can go to patreon.com/owlsatdawn and get access to goodies like the monthly newsletter we send out with extra sticky leaves and shitty minutes, as well as bonus episodes, which we release about once a month, sometimes more, in addition to voting on our next Patreon poll, which is where you get to choose the topic that we do for an episode every couple of months.
That is right. And of course, we have to give a shout out to our sponsor of the episode, Mubi. If you've been listening for a while, Mubi has been a sponsor of ours for a while. They are fantastic. It's a streaming service, an online streaming service you pay a monthly subscription to, but they specialize in independent films, regional classics, Hollywood classics, kind of the obscure auteur films that fly under the radar that those other streaming services neglect entirely. But they give you 30 perfectly curated films every single day, and they basically have like what we have termed a slaughterhouse rotation, where one film drops off every day after its 30-day cycle, which means a new film begins its 30-day cycle every day. So there's always a fresh rotation of films to choose from. And we were looking through the library before starting to record here, and I found a film in my library that
very interesting pick from you this time.
It's so ridiculous. It's called The Toxic Avenger. And I asked Troy, I was like, bro, you know about he's like, a Toxic Avenger, right? He's like, no. He's like, I don't even think I remember this. And I just remember this because it's like 1984's dudes in like puppet, like the silicone puppet kind of stuff, and it's basically about like this guy who he falls into toxic waste and he becomes a superhero after this. And there was a cartoon about this as well. And I remember I had like little action figures and things like that. But this is around this time in the 80s when, like, He-Man Masters of the Universe is being made. And it's that kind of kitschy style. But it's absolutely fantastic. And it is one of the films from this kind of infamous production company called Troma. And so this film is directed by the company's founder, Toxic Avenger. It is a very strange superhero movie, but you gotta see it because it's just, one, it's a total nostalgia trip, but two, it's one of those films that I have a feeling that if I watch it, I'm probably going to force myself now to think this way, but I'm going to be like, you know what? There's actually something profound in this. And then after listening to this episode, you guys are all going to understand what I'm saying, because then you're going to be like, oh, I get it. It was there for you. It was a home for you. So this film is like a home for us. So yeah, go to mubi.com/owlsatdawn and you can get a free 30-day extended trial. That's mubi.com/owlsatdawn, M-U-B-I, B as in boy, I, mubi.com/owlsatdawn, and you'll get your trial.
Yeah, I just want to add, here's a review for Toxic Avenger on the Mubi app. One would need to have the most juvenile, classless sensibilities possible to find any of this trash even remotely entertaining. In other words, I loved it.
Yes, that's exactly it. That is fucking perfect. Oh God. All right. Shit, I know what I'm watching tonight after I hang up from this call.
Yeah, me
Oh
too,
my
man. I
God.
gotta check this shit out.
I'm actually really excited now. All right. So we're going to jump into our show now. We got to jump into things the way we always do with our shitty minute. It's where one of us gets to rant and rave about something that's pissing us off. So, Troy, you have drawn this week's straw. What is going on, man?
Yeah, so I had something else planned, but then as you know, we'll talk about later in the episode. We're recording this on Wednesday morning in America, after Super Tuesday. And I feel like people need a little bit of, I don't know, what would you call it? You need to just sort of express yourself a little bit, get the frustration out, but also be willing to just let the frustration just seep into the atmosphere and not, hold it in and not let it sort of ruin your day and ruin your month and then your whole election cycle. Super Tuesday
Hmm.
happened, and
Hmm.
basically, for those of us who are, on the Bernie side of things, on the, social democracy would be a good thing at least. Having a inhabitable world or a habitable world in 50 years would be a nice thing.
Hmm.
Not going bankrupt when you get sick would be a nice thing. Not having $80,000 of student debt, which you'll never be able to repay, and have the government make tons of money off of you through interest would be a nice thing to get rid of. Um, for people who are on that side of things, it's probably not a great day. I
Hmm.
think a lot of us were on the hype train that's been going on for the past month or so that looked like Bernie was going to sweep most of the states on Super Tuesday, except for maybe a couple of the states in the South, like South Carolina. We knew a couple of days ago wasn't going to go for anybody but Biden, and probably North Carolina and Alabama. But then, Massachusetts and Minnesota and Texas, those were things that I think most of us expected Bernie to win. And it's a sad day that he didn't win those. And there's a lot of, yelling and screaming and blame to throw around about why Elizabeth Warren's in the race and the Democratic establishment sort of coordinating for Buttigieg and for Klobuchar to drop out and to give more support to Biden. The fact that Biden basically hasn't campaigned yet at all, doesn't spend money on ads, doesn't have any policies that he's on the stoop for, doesn't seem to do anything other than just talk about random bromides and platitudes that oftentimes he doesn't even finish saying because he can't remember the end of them. Um, it's not a great day. It doesn't feel really great, but I do want everyone to know that most of the delegates haven't even been apportioned yet. New York is still going to happen next month. There's a lot more time left, and we shouldn't get frustrated and want to give up just because we're leftists, which is like the natural leftist thing to do, right? The second
Hmm.
that there's any like competition or tension, to just give up and say everything's fucked and we can't win.
Well,
Um,
because it's easy to retreat into like horizontal action, right? And to be like, well, fuck, this is just why we are anti-statist, or this is why the state apparatus is
mhm.
essentially reactionary, or something along those lines. And it's so easy to just be like, okay, so we can go to our local protests, we can organize and organize and organize because it's safe and because it is effective as well as affective in the sense that you do meet people and you connect with people and you have small victories and those things matter. But the big victories, man, they kind of like stop your counter hegemonic trajectory, and it feels really easy to retreat back into those kind of smaller local horizontal actions.
Yeah, you want something promising? Look, is the Democratic establishment largely against Bernie? Yeah, I think that's pretty, uncontroversial at this point. Um, are they like these grand conspirators, like the Illuminati, who are pulling the puppet strings of the world? No, dude, Biden is their guy. They didn't want Biden to be their guy. I'm sure that they wanted Buttigieg to be their guy. And then they realized that wasn't going to happen, and so they had to throw things towards Biden. I don't think Biden even wants to be the guy. He's, of anybody, incredibly reluctant to be president, it seems like. He's clearly doing this purely out of a sense of duty, um, thinking that if he doesn't run, then it's either going to be Trump or nothing, because he probably thinks that there's no way Sanders could win anyway, let alone if he thinks Sanders' program is positive in any way.
Mm.
Um, they're not grand conspirators. They don't have a grand plan for the next 50 years or whatever. They're just trying to keep their paychecks coming over the next couple of months. which means they're eminently beatable, right? That's the key. Biden is not a good campaigner. He doesn't even really campaign at all, let alone do it well. He's not good in debates. He doesn't have a message. No one's excited to vote for Biden, right? Almost the reason why Biden has won all these states on Super Tuesday is really just because a bunch of people decided over the last 48 hours to vote for him because Buttigieg and Klobuchar dropped out, right? And so even though I don't want to like spin this and say, oh no, the bad news is actually good news. No, it's bad news. There's a lot still to happen, and we should still keep up the program, keep up, we'll talk later in the episode about hope and how hope can be kind of an oppressive thing. But also there's something constitutive about action that involves hope, right? There's some sense in which you have to think that it's possible to have a better world in order to actually be motivated to go out there and try and make a better world. So we should still have that. I don't think there's any reason to think that yesterday was sort of the death knell of the movement.
Do you think, I was thinking about this a lot today, and because we will talk about it kind of briefly in the episode, but I didn't feel right by a lot of the commentary at saying things like, the people are voting against their interests. The working class could have chosen social democracy, but many of them were not choosing that today, even though they didn't understand why ideology is a drug. I saw someone saying, who's a pretty prominent commentator, I saw a bunch of these kind of takes, and this was very common that we saw after Trump's election as well. Do you think that we just kind of sometimes need to stop and be like, well, actually, no, America is just essentially a very conservative country, especially in the older populations, and that people know what they're doing? Now, does that mean that they're fucking super genius political strategists that know? No, but there's a sense in which they don't want change. They don't want Bernie. They don't want the word socialism. They want what's easy, what's comfortable. They want whatever it is that they feel that they are getting by aligning themselves with Biden. Not that they're like super enthusiastic that it's a movement in the way that the Bernie movement is clearly much more kind of emotional and much more general and much more intense in its appeal. But in the sense that there is a kind of ease with which you can do your electoral duty and do your quote-unquote politics while still doing something that you think is going to beat Trump. And they think that maybe they buy the idea that there are just so many kind of center-left-ish types that it's almost like in the bag, and that's why we got to have someone like Biden, because we can't have someone that's going to rock the boat too much. And someone like Biden has the support of Obama, and he's got years of policy experience, years of congressional experience, years of experience in the White House administration, et cetera, et cetera. So that there is something that we just need to kind of take a look at ourselves. And I feel like especially it's easy if you're in your, I hate using the word, but it's an easy placeholder now, in your echo chamber on Twitter where everyone is like a Jacobin reader or they read Common Dreams or something like that. And it just seems obvious that clearly everybody wants healthcare and clearly everybody wants, student loan debt cancellation. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe actually the majority of Americans don't want that, or the majority of people who are voting in the Democratic primary don't want that. I don't know. I'm just saying, but do we maybe need to stop and realize that at some point?
No, I think part of that's correct in that, it's like small c, very broadly construed conservative is how most people probably are in America, especially older people. And by that we just mean not conservative in the sense of like political ideology, but in the sense of status quo is being comforting because at least you know what you're getting. And, there's something very American about fearing change, even if you think it could be good. And there's good reasons and bad reasons for that, but that's really neither here nor there. But I do think that it's wrong to think that people generally don't want the things that Sanders is talking about. Notice the people, especially other Democrats who criticize Sanders, are not saying that his ideas are wrong. Everyone's very careful to say that these are all great ideas, but they think that one, Sanders can't do it, meaning he can't win. And then secondly, they think that the political system is such that these ideas can never pass through the various mechanisms they have to pass through to become law, like Congress and the Supreme Court and whatnot. So they're really all procedural criticisms more than anything else, because I think Democrats largely know actually Sanders' message is a winning message, right? He has actual content to his message, which people resonate with, and that makes them motivated and makes them care about the political process for once. Just look to the fact that the youth is obviously overwhelmingly for Sanders, more than I think any candidate can remember, other than maybe Obama in 2008. And Obama only had maybe, a year or so to garner that support. Sanders has done it over 5 years, right? So that means that there's much more time for that message to seep in and be contentful in a way that Obama's really wasn't, right? He kind of ran as a progressive in 07 and 08, but there wasn't a whole lot of content in terms of, what actually policy-wise is going to change with this open change, right? So I think there's a lot to be hopeful about and to be optimistic about with that. I think overall, if you didn't have the specter of climate change on the horizon and this need to sort of ramp down fossil fuel production and emission over the next 10 years, I think we could actually be really hopeful and think that, even if Bernie doesn't win now, clearly this movement isn't going away, right? Movements like this, they don't evolve in a linear fashion, right? They have fits and starts. But when they're this big and they're this strong, this overwhelmingly youth-oriented, that means very good things to the future, right? I think the obvious counter to that is that climate change is not going to wait 10, 15 years, right? Every moment we wait longer is worse for people in the world. And that makes things a little bit more pessimistic, I think. But I don't know how to combine those two things. There's some good news and there's bad news to come with all these things, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's clearly when they do national pollings and things like that, people overwhelmingly say, they support Medicare for all. I mean, like the number one concern of people when they got out of, especially the early primaries, I haven't seen the exit polls from yesterday, but when they got out of Iowa and New Hampshire, I can't remember, but it was over 50%. I think even some over 60% Iowa, New Hampshire, and then what was after that? I go, South Carolina. But I think like the idea was that and then Nevada. It was that Medicare for all or healthcare was like the number one concern for most of them.
Yeah,
so,
healthcare is the number one concern, and obviously, I don't think anyone could say what Biden's plan on healthcare is. Something about maybe a public option, but no one thinks he's going to actually do anything about that, right?
No,
he's not going to make that his first year program, right? No one thinks that.
No, I don't know. I'm just trying to. I don't want to just completely rush to that judgment that like today was a failure because of people just want to, like, they're sadists, or like you said, they're conspiring, or the Democratic establishment are spreading lies through mainstream media and everyone is just bewitched by the mystifications. Like, I just don't like those narratives. They seem oversimplified and they seem extremely pedantic. Or not pedantic, I'm sorry, patronizing. And so I'm trying to work through that. There's got to be some kernels that are more concrete that we can think through,
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Yesterday was just a day. It's a big day, but it's still one day in a much larger scheme. We're not going to look back on Super Tuesday in 2020 and be like, that's when everything ended.
Right. Yeah. Well, your shitty minute was also my shitty minute, so I'm glad you did your shitty minute.
Yeah, I knew we were going to have to share this one. Can we also say fuck yeah, California?
Fuck yeah, California.
Our home state?
Fuck yeah, California. Yeah, I know. I don't remember it being so progressive. I remember it constantly being made fun of for being like hippie and smoking weed and shit, but hallelujah, Cali.
Yeah, I mean, this is still early morning, so I haven't read up on all the news, but I think what I've heard a little bit of was just that the Latino vote was pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
Something like 85% Latino vote was for Bernie or something like that. Maybe that was during a certain age demographic. I don't remember.
Sweet.
All right, so let's get to this interview with Macon Holt.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, y'all are going to love this one. All right, so as we've mentioned earlier, this week on the podcast, we have Macon Holt, who is a researcher from the UK who currently lives in Copenhagen, right, Macon?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about pop music and philosophy and sonic fiction and all these new terms that at least I have learned over the past couple of weeks that in Macon's book, Pop Music and Hip Ennui, excuse me. So I guess first of all, Macon, can you give us a little bit of a background as to who you are, where you're from, how you got into cultural theory, pop music, the two together, and all that kind of stuff? Did you just like read Adorno and get really mad? Is that kind of how it works?
Actually, yeah. I mean, like the first time I came across Adorno was when I was studying some variation of music tech in my undergrad, and it was was kind of outrageous, you know, like it was in a music industry course, and you're just like, how dare this guy come out of here and like say this is all shit when he doesn't even know what he's talking about, and how come everything's jazz? And then, but also the problem is like that, you know, it speaks to the music snob that makes you want to do like the kind of the little Easter eggs in the recording booth that brings you into music technology in the first place. And so, you know, after a while, I kind of metastasized, and the further I got into the sort of weird side of sound art type things, the more disillusioned I was kind of becoming with how insular it was. And when I was even doing sound art stuff, it was all kind of based on pop music, because I was just really interested in, you know, what is all this stuff around us? What is all this stuff that people are actually listening to? And it was also around the time that the Tory government came in the UK, and the whole landscape of being a weird art person seemed to be very much it was being diminished, and purposely diminished in public, and I thought I wanted to actually argue about that. So that's kind of what brought me to it. And then you start to read other stuff, and you realize that Adorno's position is going to get you in the same place as we currently were in some ways. His earlier stances end up closing off a lot of things which actually need to be opened up if there's going to be any kind of...
Do you mind just kind of elaborating what some of those ideas are?
What, with Adorno and his stuff in like the culture industry stuff, I guess? So, yeah, in this book, Dialectic of Enlightenment, that he wrote with Max Horkheimer back in the late 40s, when they were in exile in the US. Basically, he says that the culture industry is a means by which the capital is able to kind of placate the masses with a sort of substitute satisfaction, is his term. He's very critical in that essay. He and Horkheimer are very critical in that essay of catharsis and the sort of the quick relief that is given to you by cultural production. And he hates movies, but he also hates jazz. And in other pieces of work, there's an essay called something about. It's in that Adorno collection that gets passed around on the culture industry, and there's one about the problems of popular music. I can't remember its title. It's got a kind of very specific title, and he basically says that there's a kind of like a formal aesthetic critique one can give of popular music that points to its stupefying impact and the way it will limit the imaginations in a certain way, which is interesting, because for him it's not all simple or folk music that he doesn't like. It's the ones that come through this means of production, and you can somewhat sympathize with this, because you look around, you see there's a lot of trash, and it kind of does have that effect. But at the same time, you go, I don't know if that's enough, though, to say that there's nothing here, because that would give a bizarre ontological status to these products, which I don't know if they can claim to have.
Yeah, that's a good jumping off point, I think, the Adornian critique, because from what I take it, if you're going to have like a big, all-encapsulating dialectic to your book here, it's going to begin with, in one sense, accepting that thesis, right? The critique of popular music, but then also seeing where it's lacking and trying to bring that antithesis into conversation with Adorno's critique, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's that was like when this was the PhD thesis. It was sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I just went into a whole history about Adorno instead. I did a PhD at Goldsmiths in cultural studies when I was supervised by Mark Fisher and Annemiek Saha there, and learned a lot, and it opened up a lot of different things. And then this book is based on that thesis, and that. In the thesis, it was far more about that dialectical tension between, say, the sort of the Adornian everything is bad because it's been produced badly, or like not badly, but within the confines of cultural production that are dictated by capital, and then the other one, which is this multiple, ever unfolding kind of Deleuzian cultural theory of the 90s and the post-New Left kind of thing, where everything's fine because you can't actually find a structure within which to criticize it because it always defies them. Yeah, and that is the tension I'm trying to deal with. Like, how can one at one point try to assert this kind of standard from which to judge these things as problematic, whilst also recognizing that those standards will always be insufficient and not enough. to fully encapsulate the experience.
There are like a few different things here. One of them is ontological, like you said a minute ago, that you kind of had a problem with. And if we could go more of a post-hegemonic route, we could say that there's always something that escapes, right? That's something John Beasley Murray wrote a book about post-hegemony, and that's one of the things he talks about, drawing greatly from Deleuze and Guattari. And it's that idea that there's always an excess or like an extra capital space or like interstitial spaces, something along those lines. So that's the ontological thing. But then the next thing that I really liked, what you were trying to think that space, not think of that space, but to like think that music is a type of thought in itself, so that there is a thought that issues from that excess. Is that about right?
Yeah. That's about right, but that's really not me. That's Kojo Eshin, who is like the first chapter in the book is about his work, because he argues that music is thinking, and he has a different dialectic in his project, which is between the music speaks for itself, therefore don't try and explain it, and the music can be theorized entirely kind of space that he was seeing between music journalism that didn't want to talk about dance musics because they didn't have a kind of a discursive element to them, and the theorists who would say, well, if you just understand it this way, then it will finally become understood. He argued that this is what sonic fiction is, like the thinking of that space, I guess.
But it's not just that like subjective sublime that is just like just go with the flow, man, and just feel it and just be in the energy, you know. There's still something conceptual. Yeah,
it's the way that it can attach to things, I guess. It's the way it becomes, I guess, it's like it's the way it becomes somewhat sticky, that excess, you know, in a kind of gross way. I mean, you know, just like, I don't know, the literal thing of like, you know, when you're dancing, you end up sweating, you become sticky. The excesses manifest in some way. That's a silly thing. Anyway, but it's the too muchness, I guess, is the thing of it. But it is, again, not the, you know, in the opening to his book, which is like the so wonderfully polemical from the late 90s, where he just denounces the trad sublime as being this kind of refuge of this headmaster of theory, which is just great, I think, in its own way. Because it's not that just because you will never fully access it does not mean that it's not worth attempting to articulate or access it in its own way, I guess.
Yeah, so there's a quote that you note of his that I highlighted that I really liked. He said that like in cultural studies and in techno theory, cyberculture, et cetera, there's this idea that like a headmaster, theory teaches today's music a thing or two about life. It subdues music's ambitions, reins it in, restores it to its proper place, reconciles it to its naturally belated fate. And I thought that was really lovely, especially for some reason then the idea of not just subduing music, but that it goes into its proper place. And so I was thinking a little bit about, there's this prefabricated authority that is saying this is what is the right place for things to be settled, and it's theory's job to situate it there. And so it does have that headmaster or that taskmaster. There's like a legal juridical authority that is always the authoritarian, the despot or something like that. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because then he starts to play with that figure through that work, because he then posits the idea that the music itself could be the despot, or like figures like Sun Ra, for example, the jazz musician, who, you know, built this entire kind of Afrofuturist mythology around himself as a kind of, it's a quasi-Egyptian emperor, but from Jupiter, and you know, he always Eshin describes him as being you know, if he was in Blade Runner, he'd be on the side of the Tyrell Corporation, not the replicants. Like he doesn't want to cast the kind of this sort of struggle against like the oppression of people of color or black people as a redemption narrative within a kind of white structure. He's like, no, fuck you guys. and so he's talking about, actually, let's look at music's despotic potential, and that you know, really feeds into the sort of milieu within which Eshin was writing at the time, and some problematic figures that have emerged from that same milieu since.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit more about that milieu? Because I've never heard of, is it Kodwo Ishan? Is that how you pronounce his name?
Kojo Eshin.
Kojo Eshin. Yeah, I'd never even heard his name before, let alone this whole idea of sonic fiction and whatnot.
Yeah, well, he was a part of the Cybernetic Cultures Research Unit, which was this group of thinkers who were based in the University of Warwick, though always unofficially as legend goes, in the mid-90s. And among the members, you'll also find people like Mark Fisher and Nick Land.
And Nina Power was the second generation. She was my
Yes.
she was my external. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So so it's that kind of milieu of actually trying to bring these ideas outside of the academy and make them play in the world in a certain way. I mean, if you try and I think that also is kind of sort of somehow evident in that book, More Brilliant Than the Sun, that Kojo wrote back in the late 90s, because that's really impossible to get a hold of these days. It costs about $300.
Oh, wow.
So it's so entirely out of print, and they were going to reissue it from Verso, but I just got an email. I emailed them a few weeks ago asking about it, and it's like, that's not happening. And I'm wondering if it's a copyright issue, but that's a separate thing. But yeah, so it was that kind of like, we're going to bring these ideas into the culture itself, and we're actually going to try and circumvent this particular university structure, which I think they did by, as legend has it, that by moving into after they were kicked out of the university, they had moved into a room above a body shop, by which I mean the cosmetics store in the UK, not a car working place, somewhere in the town of Warwick. So again, it was like, and then the Soundmate Cultures Research Unit were the people who gave rise to notions like theory fiction and hyperstition, which is something I've tried to write about in other places at different times. Actually, I guess I don't know. Am I just going to keep talking about those? Yeah, okay. And because they kind of link. So theory fiction is this coinage that comes from predominantly Nick Land, but also the whole CCRU, which was to say that there was, in the conditions of end of history, late 90s, increasing techno culture, the boundaries between theoretical descriptions of the world and fictional interventions was breaking down almost entirely. And this is captured in the notion of hyperstition, which is a compound of hyper and superstition, which is to say an idea that manifests itself in the future by its expression in the present. It's that kind of notion that, a cybernetic system of culture that will feed back and produce itself through various kinds of autopoietic processes. And one of the banal example of this is the way that the term cyberspace migrates from William Gibson's 1988 novel, Neuromancer, and then becomes the main conceptual dispositif for the internet age that we are now living in. And so we're always thinking of this bizarre frontier, and we kind of live with the consequences of these people who are, terrifying, lonely nerds who've built systems that can explore that frontier's possibilities for their own personal gain.
So I was listening to, ironically enough, it was just perfect timing. I was listening to a little talk by Gilles Deleuze, who was talking about the difference between conception, or let's say concepts, percepts, and affects. And he basically says that philosophy is in the business of creating concepts. The artist creates percepts, and he says, but music is affective. Now, I've always thought about this as well. I've been very, very influenced by Deleuze and affect theory. So when I see the word sonic fiction, I'm kind of like, okay, this is interesting, but it seems to be too discursive to map onto this notion of affect. So can you talk a little bit about how is sonic fiction kind of creative and theoretical and not just simply like unbounded flows?
I guess it's what you think about, like how distinct these fields can be. I think that what sonic fiction does is it allows for, to use other Deleuzian concepts, a kind of point of conjunction to come around this affective experience, to know that you're already conceptualizing as you're being affected. I guess I would also be like within a sort of Deleuzian framework that these things, whilst yes, you can split them up and see the scheme, there's also a great deal of, they're undeniably immanent to each other. And it's basically trying to say that you can conceptualize through these affects, I guess. And I think one of the ways that that Eschen has done it is by, well, I mean, also the whole concept of fiction itself, it is an effective medium. And so it's about trying to, I guess, place that kind of, not really, perhaps not a midpoint, but sort of overlay, like the discursive overlay that can work through fiction, through the effective power of fiction and the effective power of music, and then kind of flip them through into the possibility of it being theorized, but as we also know, it's theorized in a sort of speculative vein rather than a descriptive or prescriptive
experimental vein. Yeah. That's where the experimentation. I mean, is it enough in your mind now? Because I know there's different readings, obviously, of the relationship between, for example, desiring production and social production in Anti-Oedipus, right? Some people would read it that like desiring production, that desire in itself is kind of like the true foundation, the excess, right? And that social production is like the misrecognition, that which is the domain of ideology, the domain of Oedipus in that particular text. Do you think that there's something, you were talking about like this, I don't think you used the word layering, but that there's kind of like a mapping on top of an intertwining and imminent relationship between concepts, which can be fictive, but then also between like affects, which, I mean, are they also fictive? Are they modified? Like how does that relation work?
Yeah, okay. That's a tricky question. But I think I guess I'm going to just like point to just one thing that it isn't like a critique. It's just more like just a point where I can maybe find something productive to work through. But when you refer to like the notion that some people consider social production to be a sort of misrecognition, I'm like, miss according to what? Because I think that's the problematics. I think with lots of people's readings of Deleuze is this notion that he's particularly interested in a sort of pure form of desire, or maybe that is somewhat present in Anti-Oedipus, especially in the last chapter of it. And then I think you get libidinal economy from Lyotard, and then they kind of reformulate that entirely in A Thousand Plateaus, and you don't get that same goal that we have missed.
Yeah, I mean, they famously say that Anti-Oedipus was a tragic failure. So,
okay, yeah.
You know.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, they say it didn't work. That's why they had to keep going. Yeah, that the volume itself failed at what it was trying to do. They use the word ideology in Anti-Oedipus, and then they intentionally do not use it in Thousand Plateaus because they think that they were still too stuck within a type of psychoanalytic framework, and so they need to take schizoanalysis even a step further in Thousand Plateaus. Yeah.
Yeah, they only use it to say it doesn't exist. So I mean that I wouldn't say it's not a total failure. It's like just chapter 4 it doesn't really work.
So,
No, go ahead. So go on. Yeah. No, I was going to try and explain something I don't really know in enough detail. So you go instead.
Well, that sounds like a great idea. That's what we do in this.
Yes, it's the motto. Yeah.
So it seems like there's a bit of a talking about dialectical movements and syntheses here. This idea of sonic fiction, it seems like you're trying to kind of combine it or think it contemporaneously with your dissertation supervisor, Mark Fisher's, kind of infamous book now, Capitalist Realism. So I'm curious, what was it just the fact that these were the two most kind of dominant modes of like analysis that were in your life at the time that made you think I gotta think sonic fiction alongside capitalist realism, or is there a more involved story or a less involved story than that?
I think it might be some. I don't know. Yeah, they were the two kind of like dominant things in my head at the time, and I remember like starting off trying to work through the entire thing without sonic fiction as a frame, and that was actually really difficult because every time this is a thing which I think is a strength and a weakness of musicology as usually practiced, is it's very concerned with like trying to move away from its past, as in the same ways that like anthropology is, of being very colonialist and being very kind of reductive and sort of stayed in its own canon of worthiness. And so that makes it very hard to make somewhat normative claims about this relationship on a kind of vague level to cultural and social modes of being. So that was like, so I was trying to work with, pop music and capitalist realism, and this wasn't a problem for Mark Fisher at all, because for him, he would just write the wonderfully acerbic takedown of the things he found to be delibidinizing or mediocre. And for me, I didn't have that same confidence, I guess. Or like it just wasn't, it's just not my mode of going into it. So every time I'd write down a sentence and try and say, this is what I'm thinking, I'm like, well, look at that 17 different ways. And you just realize you're a young middle-class white boy wondering why is everything not Radiohead? And that just seems stupid.
Yeah, he has this
stupid
quote, and I can never remember the formulation of it because I actually think it works both ways. But it's either like nobody is bored, but everything is boring, or everyone is bored and nothing is boring. I can't remember which it is, but I kind of like both of them. Do you know the quote I'm talking about?
I think I do. I think it. I can't say for sure, but given the way he likes to formulate things, I'm pretty sure it would be nobody is bored and everything is boring.
Yeah, I think that's what it is too. Yeah.
Super bleak. Yeah. No, I remember having a conversation with him once about the Black Eyed Peas song, "I Got a Feeling," which is interesting. I want to talk about that in a minute. But I was talking to him and he's like, "Yeah, it's so fucking bleak. It's like a Beckett play." And it just is that. It's this, and I think in many ways it's interesting that so the title is spelled "I Got a Feeling" as in gotta, Gotta, which doesn't actually mean have a, it means have to.
Yeah, I've got to. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then you look at it as this kind of like song that came out in 2009 as the crash starts to bite, and you think this is just like an instruction of like everyone start desiring and consuming, otherwise it's all going to fall through. But I don't think that was the... Well, again, this is again why I come to sonic fiction, and I actually came about it... I'd heard about Eshin stuff, but I found it kind of very 90s and very inaccessible, and then I ended up reading this piece by a German academic called Holger Schulze, who was writing about Eshin's work in sonic fiction, and he kind of like opened up a little bit, like saying, which kind of said like, this is really important stuff. Look at all these important ideas in it, but it also doesn't have to be just like that. And so I thought, I can maybe use this term to produce a little bit of distance between myself, the theorist coming in to intervene in everyone's good time, and the object that I'm trying to say exists. And say like, between that, we can maybe then place this way of understanding it. And if you don't like that story, I'll write you another one. That's the kind of vibe. Yeah. So, I think that's what I guess it became like this. And then I dove back into the Eshin stuff with more detail and more attention, and it just became like, okay, this is like super rich, and also like look at all the orientation of this project towards this. I guess like some sort of Afrofuture, but it's now in the context of our current world of like just Black Panther memes, that seems somewhat banal because his is not that. But it's just this kind of exciting push towards a different way the world could be, and that I guess is also to go back to that other question from before. That what this does is it just allows for there to be a discursive articulation of those affects, and for it to be more or less valid and argued and enter into a certain process of verification or something, but also that isn't the be-all end-all of it, I guess.
Yeah, you write on pretty early on in the first chapter, so a lot of my work has to do, I do some work similarly on the term hyperstition in my book that came out last year, and I'm really interested in the imagination, the power of the imagination. But lately my work has been shifting towards thinking about, in a very explicit sense, the logic of financial speculation. And one of the ways that I'm thinking about it is kind of maps onto something you said here. You said that for Eshin, the future is the actual territory that is at stake in sonic fiction. And it made me think, it's the future. Maybe we could even kind of like capitalize that as being something that is essentially almost foreclosed unless we can think speculatively, unless we can think hyperstitionally, unless we can think according to like a sonic fiction or something similar, a theory fiction. Because, for example, let's talk about the financial crisis, and we can talk about the way that financial mechanisms operate, financial instruments operate, is they seem to operate because they're able to inscribe, enclose, and quantify these domains, these territories that are as yet unincorporated into the system, but they are these extremely efficient and quick-moving devices, technologies that are able to inscribe or reinscribe and then enclose and quantify them into territories that can serve for the reproduction of capital, right? But that it's almost that there's something like messianic, or we could even like use the word like kairotic, like kairos, like a time that is qualitatively distinct, or some sort of qualitative multiplicity in Bergson's terms. There's just something excessive. I don't even know what concept is adequate to this, but sonic fiction seems to kind of map on as adding other layers that we can hopefully think from as being excessive of that tendency towards territorialization. Does that make sense? So the future at stake is simply what is so important to think about here, because otherwise you just get kind of a type of repetition of the same. And I can't remember how you talk about it, but how it's impoverished by the weight of history. There are a couple other really great things that you talk about, how it just, that creation itself is thwarted and foreclosed unless we can think along these terms, and that's why the stakes are so high.
Yeah, I think that's what I think I agree with that a lot, and I think also Kojo Eshton would also, well, at least the 90s version of him, which is somewhat in that book, would agree with that as well. And I think it's because it's also it's such a problematic space as well, because you're trying to decide whether or not, like, you're saying, I want the world to be different, and then it's different from how it is now, and lots of people are, if not fine, they are much more frightened of what you're going to invent. And I think with good historical reason from lots of different different like horrible examples of people deciding, I would like to produce a future for you now, and you are going to go along with it. So, but that is also, we're kind of cowed by that, and I guess that's like what Cernicek and Williams' whole stuff in accelerationism as a leftist project we're trying to articulate as well, that it was, you have to somehow claim that this is the fight. It's not about the slight improvement. It's about the reinvention of this future, because we got I don't know. Yeah, it's really tricky, because I think there is a lot of political nuance to it, because this is like saying you don't want to just like dismiss and forget, but you also want to imagine if you want to imagine a certain freedom from various modes of oppression, part of that freedom is to not be feeling yourself to be free. And that, I think, requires a space that doesn't yet exist.
Is that because the notion of freedom is already constituted according to a particular type of post-Enlightenment liberal conception of individual freedom that is related to like the reproduction of bourgeois ideology or something along those lines?
There's that, which I would definitely agree with, and then there's the way in which it's the ability to recall not being in that state, or the idea that state will be taken away from you in some way. So I guess that does kind of, it's like the effective consequence of rights discourse, I guess.
So we talk a little bit more about this idea of oppression as you're using it. I think this is a good place to bring in Infinite Jest, which Austin's going to be very annoyed that I want to spend the rest of the podcast talking about.
I was hoping we would get to Beyonce's Lemonade at some point. So as long as we get to Beyonce's Lemonade after Infinite Jest, I'm fine.
Okay, good stuff. Yeah.
So you take this idea of hip ennui from David Foster Wallace, and I guess that was in one of his nonfiction pieces. I don't think I've read that one, right?
No, it's in Infinite Jest.
It is?
Yeah,
I guess I just don't remember it.
It's somewhere also, like, I've got a big block quote, I think, in the chapter on complicity in it, and it's where Hal, the protagonist, ostensible protagonist, is going through the sort of his review of the position he's finding himself in the tennis academy, and that the distance between all of his friends is affecting their stance of hip ennui, which is to say, a cool detachment, lest you get caught feeling sappy or attached to anything in the world that could be taken away from you.
Yeah, which is a perfect encapsulation of like Hal's character, smoking weed in the basement all the time. What gave you the idea to kind of combine this book about pop music and capitalist realism and cultural theory, and then have these long asides about Infinite Jest? Did you just find it to be a lens through which you could best view the idea of how pop culture can be oppressive, entertainment can be oppressive?
Yeah, but also it kind of made that idea more complicated to me. I first read the book when I was going through my earlier kind of, I guess, road to Damascus post Adorno moment in my like early 20s, and I was just realizing my own arrogance from reading it, or my own kind of elitism. As you kind of, because at the same time, yeah, this is a novel about how oppressive entertainment is, and you literally have a film that makes people paralyzed by watching it because it's so gosh darn entertaining and compelling. But at the same time, it becomes, there's the character Don Gately, who's a drug addict, who recounts scenes in the novel where he's just watching Cheers for the sense of family it gives him as a little kid. When he was a little kid, and his mum was kind of in this abusive relationship, and he was just able to sit there and feel at home. And as poor a compensation as that is, it is meaningful. And the fact that you are seeking that comfort out can't be just dismissed as you've been duped by ideology, I guess. And that's what kind of drew me to it. And also when it kind of ruptured my Adornianness in in reading it. And I think that's because there's just so much, I guess, respect for people living with contradiction and finding ways through it.
This is so like hitting me in the feels right now, because so for people who are listening, we're recording this the day after Super Tuesday. And remember after the Trump election, how so many people were saying, oh, you have all of these deplorables, these idiots who are voting against their class interests, and they just aren't aware. And then I've been seeing it all day today. People saying, wow, you get all these people who are voting against social democracy, even though they're working class people, and it's not their fault. Ideology is one hell of a drug, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but do you not realize that all you're basically saying is that you, the enlightened, have escaped the cave?
Yeah.
That's what, and that they are the dumb idiots who are still stuck with an ideology, but we, the pure, are not. And I see this so often, and I think it comes from a certain empiricist reading of Marx, which is this idea that if somehow we can just break out of commodity fetishism, if we can just release the bourgeois tendency of exchange value to reproduce itself and release the truth of use value, then we can actually get to the real understanding of the mechanisms of history. And then the job of the socialist theorist is just to heighten those contradictions so that we can be aware of it, to spark our humanity or something like that. And you see this so much with like, and I love Jacobin to do their thing, but you see this so much with like certain writers of Jacobin that's like, well, we can just release our like psychological potential, which is all just very like post-Freudian ego psychology stuff that, again, I have a problem with. And I see this all the time, and it just doesn't feel right with me. But at the same time, it's so rampant on the left,
Yeah, I think that's basically my whole thing. Is it wasn't going to be enough to just go through pop music and say there's a contradiction, there's a contradiction, there's a contradiction, because sure, like you've just discovered that the product of capitalism is entirely entangled in capitalism, and it's and I think that actually Infinite Jest is a great resource for telling you that that is not enough. And I don't know if it gives a full picture of what would be enough, but I think it gestures towards it, because also I think I really love that book, but I also think there's a conservatism in it which I'm a bit worried about, and there's also a little bit of a tipping the scale the other way from irony sometimes, which I think isn't quite right, considering the book is just heavily ironic and and really interesting because of it. And then so I just started like trying to think, how do I stick all these things together? Like, because I wanted to use it to deactivate that part of Adorno that I thought was not helpful, and but then also to kind of also serve as a sort of weight to the kind of the like post-Deleuzian cultural theory stuff, which kind of just goes off into everything is great. There's a nice line in Steve Goodman's book Sonic Warfare, which is a great exploration of Spinoza through sound, I guess, where he talks about the kind of like these just perfunctory celebrations of mediocrity that some areas of pop music studies have become. And we want to try and like actually be able to say that and make that claim. And I think that novel does provide some of the resources for that. And then actually, the more I ended up studying it and looking at it at the same time as all this, you find apparently there's some really interesting readings of the book as a critique of Lacan, which I thought was useful to play through as well.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting. I'd never kind of thought of Infinite Jest as, in some sense, a critique of Lacanian psychoanalysis. But you say that, I think I even have it written down here, that Wallace has it that the Lacanian gesture to point to the tension between frustration and melancholy, which is inherent in capitalism, as the origin of all that troubles us internally as myopic, and the resolution of this tension can only be regressive. Yeah, did that idea come just kind of as like a eureka moment for you? Because I don't think I've ever heard anything about.
Sort of, which is strange, because like the source of that, like I didn't really figure that out as an idea, but this is like Marshall Boswell's reading it in this book called Understanding David Foster Wallace. So it's like this kind of like very much a secondary text. But then I kind of like think through it, and I think like, what is the consequence of that reading of it? And I think what I think Infinite Jest then becomes is this sort of experiment as like, what if the ontological and existential claims of Lacanian psychoanalysis are entirely correct? Well, then what happens if we posit the object pétier that you actually can access? What happens if you place that, when you break the model with that? And then when you break the model with that, you kind of realize there's got to be more. There has to be a little bit more than this. And I guess that, I think, to me, helps me navigate where I think about concepts like lack, because I think of them, I can't let them become the existential condition in the way that so many other cultural theory approaches to such texts, to things like pop music become, because it will always be explained by lack. And if you just have that as this kind of black box, then so it really helped actually give support to my notion that lack is experiential, but it's certainly proper to our ideological conditions, but I don't think that it's enough to base an understanding of this material.
So now we can talk about Lemonade, right?
Yes, okay, great.
The reason I ask is because it's really easy for me, when I'm not in my critical modes, to just hear the new Justin Bieber song and be like, my God, it's the same words with the same beats, the same inputs, that some songwriter, probably with Justin's help, put this together, but it's all done through like, I don't know, focus groups, and they're looking at trends, and it's this totally manufactured algorithmic game for like the furthering of the stock price of whichever record company it is, and then whoever the financiers that are funding it. So there's a very cynical take that I can have on pop music. So how do you go from Sonic Fiction to Hip Ennui and this as being like a wonderful diagnostic text that is maybe post-Lacanian or kind of critical of Lacan and pressing things into new ways, to then looking at Lemonade and talking about that excess? How does the through line cut through them, and kind of where does the text lead us?
Well, I guess for this, I ended up drawing a lot on Franco Berardi's stuff, especially his big kind of theory book, and which is he calls and the phenomenology at the end. And he has this wonderful conceptualization of treachery or betrayal in it, which I won't fully go into here, but I just kind of thought, like, what if I think about pop music as a somewhat sort of treacherous text, or like a treacherous cultural form that is, I guess putting this in the way, like a friend of mine who's not really in this world asked me at the weekend what my book was about, and I said, like, well, everyone's miserable, but we've got pop music, and that's something. And I think it's more about, okay, so this is the something. This is the stuff that's before us. The sensation that people have, however misguided it is, that Beyonce will change and save the world, does point to, I think, something useful, something that can be mobilized or directed, or it points to like a desire that I think that should be able to be utilized in some way. And and just to think, okay, so let's treat this, because I mean, everything you said about like, you know, the focus groups, it's correct, but then you're done. That's the problem with it. Like you can just go, well, that's awful, and then
that's bleak as
by.
fuck.
yeah, and again, this is one of the things that I try and work through in the book is like you can be entirely correct, and then you're defeated, you know, and that's what I kind of wanted to say. Like, okay, let's just suppose that you're not, and that this is going to be, there'll be some modes of like temporary alliance, there'll be some modes of, you know, celebrating only partially, like trying to actually, you know, deal with it as problematic, and you know, in the proper sense of that term, and then see what can be utilized of that. I mean, this is what I try and, like, you know, right now I'm doing lots of kind of music journalist type stuff, and I don't want to tell you whether I think it's good or bad. I want to tell you what I think is interesting about it. And if I don't want to tell you, if I can't think of anything interesting, I'm not going to write about it. Or I'll just really, really work hard to find something. But that's a different concern.
Do you read The Quietist, Macon?
Yes, sometimes, yes.
That's what makes me think of the style of journalism. It's much more about what's interesting about this rather than is it good or bad.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. There's also, like, you know, where you get from, again, like Mark Fisher talking about like you know, what is a critic? It's just like someone who is meant to amplify what's already there, you know, and so you when you listen to, so yeah, we're back onto Lemonade, I guess. What is interesting about it, I think, is the performative conservative backlash to it, because to me this points to a contradiction that capital is going to have to try and deal with, and that being that it's tied itself so much into this bourgeois liberal familialism with this white male center, that, you know, even though we can criticize the appropriations of black culture to make money for this same complex, the fact that it's offensive to people does point to this kind of moment where the outside is not entirely encapsulated, but is now actually accessible to more people. And it will be encapsulated, it will be contained, but the thing will change and mutate. The thing that it's within will change in its character, because it's now having to incorporate more stuff. And I don't know if that's actually I don't think it's a way out, but I think it's something that makes more complicated the situations. This situation, it's it's the problem. I have this constant monologue going like, don't offer the kind of platitude. It's gonna be, but what I'm trying to say is like it can, for a moment, it opens up other modes of being to a kind of mainstream audience, and it will, of course, be entirely subsumed by this. But we have to try and look for these moments. Because I think, you know, back to Mark Fisher, there's that wonderful close to Capitalist Realism where he talks about, you know, it's in the dark of night you actually see how bright the kind of the gaps in all this are. Like there is possibility, and I think that's how it can offer that, things like Lemonade.
Yeah, I mean, just to quote you near the end of the book here, you have a quote from Bell Hooks about Lemonade, and then you conclude by saying, this is where the constructive work begins, to build a relationship to popular music that can help us move beyond the cycle that causes us to use such music as a way to return to a home that capital built.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Oh, that was eloquent a few months ago.
So here's the pushback question that I have from my non-Deleuzian friends. Is this not just fetishizing like vitalism or fetishizing life with a capital L? Does this not just replace one set of maybe fetishistic theoretical dispositions for others? I'm very partial to this from a theoretical perspective, because it does fit a lot with the way that I kind of tend to view things. But at the same time, I also understand at least two things. One, that it could maybe be that, okay, I'm kind of replacing it for my own type of foundationalism, a foundationalism of like unbounded potency or something along those lines, right? Yeah. And then at the same time, I'm also aware that it's very difficult to build a political project on this. And Deleuze and Guattari are very clear in subsequent like introductions or prefaces and things like that like Anti-Oedipus, for example, where they speak about desiring production, is not a political project. It's social, it's artistic. Foucault calls it ethical in his preface to, I think it's like the German or the Italian, one of the editions. He says it's an ethical project, and that's his reading of it. And then you get some people that are like the reformists, and then of course you have the accelerationists that all kind of take these Deleuzian and Deleuze-Guattarian ideas into different directions. But it's just very difficult for me to wrap my head around as like a political project. And then also like that some people do say that, oh, are you just not like fetishizing like life and creativity and things like that? And that just doesn't really have a lot of gravitas, you know?
Yeah, I get that. I think also because learning my Deleuze from Mark Fisher and also Luciano Parisi, who's a genius, who are all like students of Nick Land. I have a little bit of that in me, I think. So I think my response to the notion that I'm fertilizing vitalism is that my model includes death. But like that is so like that great, but pretty interesting early Nick Land essay, Making It With Death, where he talks about the sort of anti-vitalism of creation. So I would my pushback would be to say that I would like to complexify this model further and to say that we are also because it's never unbounded, I guess, is my other thing. Like it's always because of Beyonce's career that Beyonce gets to the position where she can do this, which means she's already sold out a whole bunch of stuff. And it means that she has a whole track on the album, basically like celebrating being worked to death. What's it called? Anyway, and yet at the same time there is that tension. So you're basically trying to work out, can you push the enclosure mechanism in more favorable directions for the fallible, the sort of dying body that you inhabit, and the community that is also fragile and vulnerable, that you're a part of. So that, I guess, would be my desire to want to make that more complicated. And I guess also why I kind of draw on this notion of betrayal and treachery in it, because like we're trying to actually betray a world that actually owes us, that has shown no loyalty to us, that doesn't love us back. And at the same time, that is not necessarily the most stable foundations on which to do something. And then what was your other point, which I...
well, it was just like, could we err sometimes on the side of like fetishizing like a vitalism, and then the other one is like, how do you have a political project? This,
and then
and is that asking too much? Is that like an unfair question? You know,
I think it's an unfair question of pop music. In like, I don't think it can have a political project, but I think it's like, how can we can? It's like we're going to utilize it in some way because it's in our like I talk about it a lot as a kind of an atmosphere, and like if that's our atmosphere, then we're gonna have to draw what we can from it, and that might mean that's how we converse, talk about how we decide what's important. But yeah, I mean, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's a political project here, it's in the extremely broad sense that it's reconfiguring how we deal with popular culture, not as this sort of negative force which just grants us catharsis and then makes us apolitical, but that we can actually use in a positive way. So like, to use a Kantian term, we're basically saying this has got to be a practical postulate that popular culture can actually be, in some sense, instrumental and constitutive of a political project, even if itself is not, the political project exhaustively, which seems both, appropriately humble, right? It's not saying that pop music's going to change the world, but also it's going to actually give you some practical like syllogisms to enact, not just sort of dampen you and make you apolitical.
Yeah, it's like, I guess, like, I mean, like, to tie that to the thing we were talking about earlier, it's like, it's a thing that, dares you to contest the future. That's that there's a sensation there you're wanting to chase and like recreate and reproduce and share in that experience, and that is a temporal desire. It has to happen in the next instance, and so that, I guess, that's the thing, is like, that the affect of popular music is to say, I guess, that to will that it would go on, to will that this kind of enjoyment or connection could go on.
I was John Roth is a Deleuze scholar, and he did a series on difference and repetition, and the way that he describes the third synthesis of time as the eternal return of difference, as the forever guarantee of the death of identity. And I really liked that. It might be a bit of a psychoanalytic reading, but I do think that it's there in difference and repetition as well. But it's that perpetual guarantee that identity is going to die. So there's This is like a very anti-vitalist reading. Like you get Peter Howard's reading of Deleuze that is all like mystical vitalism or whatever, but then John Roth is very much a materialist reading, and I really like that because it does add that different component that you need to understand Deleuze's thinking through of his like synthetic logic.
Yeah, I think that's the proper theoretical grounding of what I was trying to get at. Yeah.
Austin, were you thinking at all about being 14 and listening to Rage Against the Machine when we're talking about all this stuff?
No, you know what I was saying, though, is you guys made me feel really good about sitting at home watching Saved by the Bell when I was a kid. And I was thinking to myself, hey, you know what? At least it's something, right?
Yes, exactly, yeah.
And it gave me a home when I was like, my mom was at work and stuff like that, and I did. Yeah. Saved by the Bell was my thing, so...
I think that's,
even though we're talking all about the positive potential of pop music, Macon, you end the book talking about Shoo Shoo, which really warmed my heart because I don't think anybody but you and me know about Shoo Shoo. What made you decide to end the book that way? So Shoo Shoo is like a kind of like a crazy. I mean, now they're kind of like almost like droney, dark ambient, kind of indie rock band, but they've undergone a lot of transitions over the last they've been around for like 15 years or so at least.
Yeah, I think since actually it's probably since around 2004ish. So yeah,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, maybe earlier. Jesus. Yeah, I guess they're kind of an example of this process sort of working on me that I sort of try and describe in the last chapter, which is that through some sorts of experience of my life, through writing this book and trying to figure out this kind of stuff, I kind of reopened to that music. So this was about, I listened to them when I was a teenager and then kind of promptly forgot about them because they were just too hard to fit into my schema of what a person was in a certain way. It was because it was desolate, but also fun, but also horrifying and energetic. And then, as I've kind of expanded my sort of ability to comprehend or conceptualize these affects, I realized, okay, so it's actually, I was just really uncomfortable with a music that has a certain kind of queer darkness to it, in this kind of queer theory sense of the term, and that really, working through this book, the thesis into the book was just like, this is what this stuff is, and this is why it's important. It's actually, there is something changed about my conception of identity. I guess that part of the identity has died in some way when I conceptualize the affects of this music, and the willingness to, or the potential within this field, because I guess this is the tension, which is that Beyonce will always end up betraying us for the corporate overlords, and Juju will never be listened to by other people other than me and Troy. But still, this vernacular way of expressing things to each other, that might be, that has to be something that we can use. And the ways that, various, barriers to entry to doing this have come down in the last 20 years, and the way that it's no longer a viable career for almost anybody says that maybe this can in some way be ours again. It's too hopeful, but yeah, that's all. Yeah, the hopeful note of ending on Juju is a little joke, I guess, in its own way.
So I don't know if you know, but I'm actually producing the cinematic adaptation of Inventing the Future that's coming out any day now, and we're just trying to figure this out. But so the director of the film, Isaiah Medina, he has a quote from an interview that he did, a couple years ago, actually, when we first announced that we were going to be adapting the book by Cernick and Williams. And he says, the task is to invent, not merely to hope. Yeah. And I thought that there was something wonderful, because our entire approach to the film, which is obviously not the same as music, so the question is, are we dealing with different modes of being, maybe? Perhaps, but the point is that it's kind of an embodiment of this same kind of idea that Nick and Alex are talking about, that comes out of the CCRU, that I think really latched onto a lot of the stuff that you were saying, that resonated quite a bit with how the conversations that Isaiah and I had in trying to do something that was visual, that was going to have conceptual elements, but that at the same time needed to be affective through and through. And that this idea, this mantra, that the task is to invent, not merely to hope, was something that we constantly thought about. Because when you hope, you're using the tools that are at hand. You're using the resources to like discursively theorize based on these like reflective ideas. But invention might be able to circumvent that, or navigate through that, or beyond that, or outside that, or something along those lines.
Yeah, to put it really succinctly, hope is, it may not be passive, but it's definitely not sort of proactive, right? There's a sense in which you're reacting when you're hoping towards circumstances, whereas inventing is obviously proactive, right? There's creation there.
Yeah, which is of course like it's a situation which is only possible if you have a certain degree of like stability or comfort or you know the resourcefulness of, because you don't want to make the invention, because I really am sympathetic to this entire position, but you don't make the invention into this kind of reemergence of a kind of Crusoe figure, that kind of, because I also like being in the land of Kierkegaard. The whole thing with hope is it's a fraught discourse here, and I've had many arguments with people about it, but a guy here, which I think maybe you guys should talk to in the future, this guy Mikkel Kraus Franzen, has this. It takes this kind of idea from Kierkegaard of like hope is only possible when there is no longer any. So there is a proactive form of hope you can find in certain approaches to it, but at the same time, I guess, because I think invention, again, there's a certain hope that's going to work. These things are so tied together. I've not made anything clearer here at all.
I feel like I mean it's almost like it's this endless process of scraping away the meaning of one concept and then allowing certain residual elements to make connections with another concept that we scraped away certain meanings. And so hope and invention, they're similar, but there's also, again, it's that excess. There's something that we can peel back from the kind of idea of hoping that Troy was talking about, that we can allow that there's something that is maybe libidinal, excessive, vital, to kind of poke free, so that even in a thing, I was thinking too, not just about Lemonade, but I was thinking about Childish Gambino's, was it This Is America, that song? And I was thinking about that, and I talk a lot with a friend here in Sydney who he's a philosopher, and he's much more pessimistic about the potential for creativity of pop music and pop culture in general. Whereas I tend to think like, no, there is that excess that is beyond. And when you think about a music video like This Is America, there's something beyond words, beyond thought, beyond technological determinations, beyond capital enclosure. There's something that is escaping when those fucking images pierce my soul, you know?
Yeah, I think this is, I'm actually trying to, I write a little bit about This Is America in the book, and I'm trying to flesh it out into an actual full article, because I was just struck by the amount of critiques of that work that don't mention the music ones. Like there's just like, there's think pieces about how problematic the visuals are. It's like, but you missed that the entire song is about code switching, right? You missed that you're going between different discursive structures of like, here's this acceptable narrative of like the kind of MLK civil rights, like church choir kind of joyous, the sort of what's the term? It's from the kind of redeemed black subjects of America. Oh, subjects is the wrong sense. And then actually, no, there's something else. There's something incomprehensible. And this is also why Steve Gubbin's book is great, because he talked about the political potential of bass, because it is a problem for discourse, and it will disrupt things. And the prizing of these sort of mid frequencies of the discursively comprehensible is like to say you're prizing the white guys that write things down and read speeches to each other.
So I was at an art gallery here in Sydney, last week, and there was an exhibition there, and I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was all about shadows. And I became struck. I was in there, and I was with my aunt. My aunt was visiting, and I got overwhelmed by thinking about how normally I think we take light to be, let's say, the preeminent element, right? And that a shadow is like an encroachment on the light. And I think a lot of this comes from a certain religious discourse. I think even there's maybe a masculinity in this as well. That's the constructive. It's logos. It's the word. It's the forcefulness of creation, right? And then shadow is like this residue that we're always like trying to push in the background, or that's dark, or that's scary, that's oftentimes feminized as well. And we talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago with Lars Eier, who was on here in his book Nietzsche and the Burbs. And Troy and him were talking about all of this like noise metal stuff that I don't know, but they're like, it's so slow and grungy and primordial, and you're talking about bass. And then I was sitting in this fucking exhibition, and I'm thinking about shadows, and I'm starting to think like, God, maybe our existence, like the vital impulse, is our neurotic need to push away the shadows and the darkness. And then I'm thinking all like, maybe we are just essentially shadows and all this shit. And I'm sitting there, and my aunt is like, oh, look at this beautiful thing, and I'm like, I'm fucking overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think it's the same kind of motion. It's that notion that, in a more banal sense, I'm reminded of the cliche that I hate, where people talk about how sunlight is the best disinfectant, because like, well, no, because things that are illuminated often grow really well, like weeds and stuff, or get the infection spreads. I think, it's like those are the kinds of spaces I guess I'm kind of interested in forms opening up. And I think like one of the reasons why I think pop is an interesting way to do this is because it's already an entirely appropriative form. It's already just like ripped off blues music that has been gone through like various kinds of iterations and recombinations. And, it's like this space where we can maybe throw a kind of spanner into the kind of like the territorializing machine in its own way. But
is there some sense in which there's like a theme here of, if we can save pop music, we can save anything?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I like that. Also, maybe it's like, I think my position is like, it doesn't need to be saved, because I guess, I wonder if we can realize the kind of hegemonic or despotic power of resisting capital in some sense. I mean, I don't think it needs redemption. I think redemption is one of the problems, because then we're just going to fit inside this problematic system's definitions of worthiness, I guess. Yeah, I've gone really abstract here, but
and then I'm thinking that is the opposite of redemption. Then just not to go full on Nick Land here, like you were talking earlier, but like that acceleration of some sort of deep metaphysical nihilism.
Yeah, that's the kind of the worry. And I guess also what, the thing I appreciate about A Thousand Plateaus is every chapter has the same structure of like, look how free you can be, now here's how it kills you. And I think that maybe is the sort of the kind of space I wanted to try and like apply directly to pop music, and say like, look, there's all this space we can play in. This side is going to end up just taking you back to the start again, and this other side is probably going to kill you. But you can maybe navigate it, and maybe it can be useful to you as a flow, that you can move through. But again, with that kind of Adornian weight of it's going to kill you or it's going to oppress you, and
So you mentioned throughout the book, Macon, this famous line from Mark Fisher, that it's easier to imagine the end of capitalism than the end of the world, right? And you have like a way of trying to reinterpret that idiom. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe we can use this as a way to segue out?
So it's obviously like that's the kind of the big cliche of like leftist theory circles, because it sounds so dramatic, and it is rightfully dramatic. And then my reading of this is, given how like sort of intolerable Mark Fisher found the world, both from knowing him in person and also from reading his work, you go, well, maybe we should be ending the world. Maybe, considering our world is so tangled up in these codes that capital has helped formulate, maybe it should be end. Like, if there is a beyond that, this one is over, and maybe we should be okay with this. There's this great, I think he works for Verso, Italian young philosopher called Federico Campagna. He just talks about how the fear of the end of the world is a very kind of Anglo-Saxon sort of capital liberal subject point of view, because from his point of view of being from Italy, the world's ended many, many, many times before, and it's going to keep doing it. And it's maybe we just have to interrogate what we're attached to. That being said, I don't want to romanticize that as if that would be an easy thing or that it would be in any way necessarily egalitarian. This is the anxiety about the kind of nihilism that could be implicit in this, and why it requires longer books on different things to actually get at. But I want to place that in a discussion of pop music, that maybe we want to have a different world where our vernacular and folk musics of the present day can do other things.
And isn't it always the case that you don't realize that another world has been created until it's after the fact, right?
Yeah.
And you sit there and you look back and you're like, oh shit, this is a different world. So there's a sense in which it's like almost an unconscious action or flow, and that as soon as it becomes either pre-conscious or even conscious, then it will automatically be foreclosed by the control mechanisms of kind of the determinant conditions of social production.
Yeah, but then I guess we could also then say that the moment we're kind of living through right now, like both with the disappointment of Super Tuesday and the disappointment of the December election in the UK, is we're living through a lot of people who are seeing the world as they know it come to an end, and there is a struggle before it as well.
Well, I mean, I was talking with family recently, and there was a very, from middle-class suburbs in Southern California, a very real fear amongst them and their friends, older generation, white, middle class, maybe even some of them middle upper class, that Bernie Sanders is going to somehow take away their 70 years or 60 years of hard work, and their housing prices are going to devalue and things like that. So there is a real sense in which you mentioned this earlier, that just the idea of something that seems to be transformative, even if it's just fucking social democracy, it's not like we're talking about a Stalinist utopia here or something like that, but that it threatens their comfort and their lives so much that they have such a hard time even accepting that this wouldn't just be catastrophic for them.
I think I mean this is one of the maybe a kind of a casual use of the term, but you're disrupting a theory fiction in a certain sense, aren't you? You like with this invitation to change there's a theory about how life is going to play out, and that there's a certain justice to it, a certain narrative structure to it, and there's obviously downsides to it, but the downsides that we are aware of, and the offer of saying, let's take that away and replace it with even something, relatively tame like social democracy. It's frightening, because there's a lot. Again, it's also a libidinal investment as well, like an identity. Like it's the holding on to the death of identity. It's holding on to the identity that will inevitably die. I can't fix this with my book, though. I don't think it's.
That's great. Troy, did you have anything else you wanted to ask about Infinite Jest before I get us out of here as quickly as possible? No.
I mean, so many things, but I'm going to go ahead and press down, press the libidinal urge to talk about Infinite Jest from the beginning. So.
It's best that way. Otherwise, it will just. I've ruined so many evenings.
Maybe we can do a bonus episode where I just sit back and I just ask you questions because I haven't read it, and you guys just talk about Infinite Jest for 30 minutes.
Yeah, we'll test it afterwards and see if you can just write the entire thing out from our conversation.
Hell yeah, deal.
Great.
Right, well, this has been great, Macon. Thanks so much for coming on with us.
Well, thanks for letting me come on. As I say, I've been a long-time listener, and it's kind of surreal to actually have to respond to what you guys are saying.
No, this is cool. I really enjoyed the book. It's funny, it doesn't have immediate practicability for my current project, but because you're kind of situating it within the post-GFC crisis, then it there's some theoretical stuff here that I actually was like, oh fuck, this is actually a really good way of framing certain things. So I think it'll be useful as a resource for myself as well.
That's great to hear, because I don't really know where this book belongs. So trying to place it wherever I can is in front of the eyes that I think might appreciate it. But yeah, great.
Cool.
And I
Thanks so
always
much
feel
for
good every time I listen to Sons of Kemet, so it's good for me too.
Fantastic, because there's some good references in this.
Sweet. Well,
but-
cool. Well, I guess we'll let you take off, and
Yeah.
we'll hopefully just chat with you soon.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time.
All right, so thanks so much to Macon for coming on and talking about his book, Pop Music and Hip Ennui, with us. That was super fun. I really enjoyed talking a little bit about cultural theory, not always about politics and philosophy, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Although we combine all the things together.
Yes, I can't help it sometimes.
So you know what we got to do now before we get out of here, Austin.
I'm ready.
It's the sticky leaves, man.
Yeah.
This is where one of us talks about whatever it is that's bringing us meaning in a potentially meaningless world. So, Austin, what's doing it for you?
When your life is lived as a nerd researcher, you have ups and downs where sometimes you're motivated and other times where you lose that motivation, right? And sometimes it could be just a small thing that motivates you and invigorates you. You have a great conversation with a friend. It happens with you oftentimes. Like before we did this podcast, I was really tired and I was kind of a little bit, not down in the dumps, but I was just like, oh man, I just wasn't in the mood for it. And then I was like brushing up on my notes from Macon's book and I was like, okay, I'm kind of excited to talk about this. And then through the course of the conversation, I'm like reinvigorated now, right? This happens to me when I teach. It happens to me when I'm in some sort of seminar setting or at a conference. There's something infectious that kind of like sparks me back to energy. Well, it could also be something simple about just getting a new toy. And my new toy facilitates my research in a way that I was not expecting it to. And I have to thank you, Troy, because you were the one who really encouraged this and then told me about an app that I could get to help facilitate my research even more. My iPad is the best purchase. Yes. And my iPad is the best purchase I have made for my academic work ever. Ever. Okay, first of all, I feel really cool carrying it. Okay? I feel like I look like I'm, like in the future of those movies, the futuristic movies where someone has like a pad that they have on their arm and you like walk up to them and they're like boop, 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 and they kind of like just press the screen. Like I feel like
they have
I'm
the
one of those
auditory
people.
beeps, which just no future technology will have.
Yeah, everything's just going to be silent. But I still, I can imagine in my mind, I hear the sonic sounds. But I feel like I'm one of those people, first of all. But second of all, I've been doing mostly all my reading on a laptop for the last 9-ish years, I would say. And this is mainly because of convenience, because I've been traveling, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem with my laptop is that it's a little bit clunky and the battery runs out kind of quickly and you've got to plug it in. And for some reason, the way that the laptop is set up is not as nice as the iPad is. Now, I also got the iPad pen thing, which
stylus thing.
Yeah, which is amazing, dude, because I can like draw in the margins and I like to handwrite things, so I can take notes and I can make like little diagrams that make no sense to anybody else but that make sense to me. And I need that shit because there's not enough room, one, in the margins of regular books, like actual tactile books. And then on my laptop, I couldn't do the draw thing. So I have this pen in my hand, so it makes me feel like I'm taking notes in a real book. Plus, I feel like I'm in some sort of futuristic movie with the fake beeps that don't exist. And then on top of that, the ease with which I'm able to actually read these books is so great. And so tell people the name of the app. What is it? Goodreader?
Yeah, Goodreader.
Okay, and it's not Goodreads, because I downloaded that one at first and I was like, wait a second, this sucks. This isn't the one. Yeah, it's good. It's Goodreader, and it is just a great app. I can do all the annotations that I need. I can highlight, I can underline, I can make notes in the margins, and then I can use the stylus pen where I can star things and then circle things and question marks and be like cross-reference Sartre's CDR, which is what most of my notes are in the margins. And I can do all of that shit. But it's just been, it has reinvigorated my love to research in a weird way of saying that. It's just kind of made me feel like there's an ease of access to my work, and then when I have that energy level, then I'm able to concentrate in my work more. So I just want to recommend, and I just got the cheap version of the iPad. And by cheap, it's still like, I think they were like $500 here in Australia. But everything's expensive in Sydney, so it might be less in the States. But I just got like the cheap one, and it's been fucking great. It's been great. I can still watch Netflix on it too, and like YouTube and shit like that, which is better than my phone. And again, it's just it's sleeker and it's easier to carry around with me than my laptop all the time. So it's been fantastic. It's been absolutely fantastic, and I have to say thank you. And I have a feeling that it will actually yield good results for my research just because of this reinvigoration that I have.
Yeah, dude. I mean, there's something about finding some new like technological innovation that makes reading, note-taking, and everything else simpler, easier, even just more beautiful. Right, the way the Goodreader app is laid out, it's a little complicated. So maybe the first couple of days you're using it, you're a little lost. But once you kind of figure out how to navigate it, it's really well organized and aesthetically pleasing. And like the little bookshelf, do you have the bookshelf view on where you have all the books that you're looking at once?
Oh God, I don't even know this. I have it open with me right now. How do I do it? Which one is it?
I think if you just like press X in the top left when you're looking at books, it'll go to like.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, you can configure that differently. It's like it makes everything so much better of an experience, right? I still do love the feeling of and the smell of like having a real book in your hands. Like I'm still nostalgic for that. I think anybody who was born pre 1995 probably has that sense, right? But I can't go back. Like it's just too great to have access to basically every book you would need on a certain subject all at once. Available before you and searchable and editable, and yeah, it's all just too perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have the romantic idea about holding a physical book in my hand that I still love, and there's something to the one thing is the brightness of the screen, right? The blue screen. It is not good for your eyes. It does make you, especially at night if you're trying to read, it keeps your brain awake and stuff like that. Whereas, that nice kind of off-white papery color is great. I love that. And I love that feeling in my hands. And as silly as it sounds, I feel like I'm a part of a tradition when I'm reading a physical book. And I lose that a little bit when I'm reading on the e-readers.
You also can't go to the cafe and show all the ladies what you're reading.
Yeah, you need that, man. I mean, how am I supposed to pick up chicks so that they know that I'm reading something deep, like Ovid's Metamorphoses, so they can come up to me and tell me how it's problematic, and then I can be like, I know, I understand. Here's the feminist critique, and then we can get into a really lovely conversation, and they can see that I'm sensitive, and I'm a feminist, and I'm, cool, apparently. I know, you can't do that anymore. Someone was making a joke about that on the train, because with the Kindle, it was like, you can't do that. And I was like, yeah, man, my game has really been ruined, because someone can't tell that I'm reading, like, Howard Zinn's of People's History or something like that, and they can't tell that I'm progressive or some shit like that just from the cover.
There needs to be a really small, wide, like LCD screen on the back of your iPad that just displays what you're reading.
Or have it like a little hologram that like shoots up the top that just and it rotates a little bit just so that everyone can see. Oh Jesus, yeah, but it's great. I love it. So. It has a lot of other functions, too, for people who are out there who have been debating for a while. It took me a long time. I mean, what is this, 2020? And this is my first one? I know a lot of people are like, dude, duh. Like, we've had one of these for ages. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I was a little bit slow with trying to figure this out. But it's great. Oh, and the new one is great, too, because I can actually record. Like, it's got GarageBand. So if I needed to, like, for some reason, I could actually record GarageBand on here. It's got all the functionalities that I would need from my laptop. It's just in a tiny, sleek little package. So, yeah, it's cool, man. It's really good.
They don't have USBs on them, though, right?
No, but I've got the little converter thing.
Oh, it can convert to what, like an iPad port?
Well, my converter has like a multiple plugins because I have to use that anyway for my microphone for my laptop because my laptop doesn't have a USB port. Because Apple is moving to, it's called like the small USB, like instead of the regular USB, it's the USB mini or whatever the fuck it's called.
Yeah, my new laptop has that too. I haven't figured it out yet.
It's so stupid. What is the deal with that? I know. I don't even know the name of it. I'm like, hey, this little USB thing. But yeah, so. All right, sweet. I guess we should go ahead and wrap up the episode there, yeah?
Yeah.
Awesome. As we said at the outset, go to mubi.com/owlsatdawn and get your free 30-day trial. Check out Macon's book. It's really legit. What else? We'll go to patreon.com/owlsatdawn. You can support us that way. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, dude?
Yeah, you know all the ways to find us on the Twitter and the Gram and through email and all that stuff, and through the internet on owlsatdawn.com.
Cool. Well, I think there's nothing else we really got to say unless there's something burning you.
Just one more thing I can think of, dude.
What's that?
Das Vidania Amerikanski.